Então, peço licença a vocês para mudar o idioma. So, on behalf of Gesel, I would like to thank you very much for attending this webinar. It's a very important webinar for us with the presence of IRENA specialists. So we are looking very forward for the results of this webinar. As a normal procedure of these webinars, we record every presentation, and those presentations will be available in 24 hours for all the members that have registered on the webinar. So tomorrow you'll be receiving all the registers of the information that were presented here in this webinar. Please keep your microphones and camera off because it can disturb the presentation. So please take care of that. And we are looking forward for the questions that you will be able to submit to the presentation for the speakers of this webinar. So feel free to ask, and that will be a session of Q&A, question and answers, after each presentation, okay? I prepare a very, let's say, small presentation just to give you, let's say, highlights of the H2 situation in Brazil. Fabiano, if you could put the presentation on, so it's a 4-slide presentation, so it will give the background of this webinar. So the webinar is related to the hydrogen economy, perspective and potentials. This webinar were organized by Professor Nivaldo de Castro, Professora Teresa Aquino, Ana Carolina, Adeli, Piero that will be conducting the webinar, Nelson Ciffer, and myself. So let's move on. First of all, Gesel. What is Gesel? Gesel is a study group of the Brazilian electrical system. It's connected to the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and it has 24 years of existence, and it's a very, let's say, important think tank of the Brazilian electrical system. As its mission, it states to produce and disseminate knowledge, information, and studies, develop human resources associated with economic regulation for the Brazilian electrical sectors, and also the South American sector that we envision our participation in the South American sector. As a vision to be an international reference think tanks, and all the products can be accessed freely on this website that is written in this slide. So feel free to access the website. There are a lot of information related to all the work that we develop, and all free, available for everyone that want to get the information and download it as a reference for studies that could be developed. Next slide, please. Entering the H2 global perspective, we see it more clearly that hydrogen is a very relevant market. I think after several years of ups and downs in the hydrogen sector, we foresee that now this can be an up that's very important for hydrogen. After all the plans that are being written by governments, the importance of the market will increase for 110 billion nowadays to around $200 billion in this perspective, as hydrogen as a vector to enable this decarbonization of the world economy. So hydrogen is becoming a very important asset to reach the goal of the environmental agreement that were stated in Paris, and also the last one in the COP26 that were held in Glasgow. A lot of countries find that hydrogen is a strategic for countries that have difficulties to abate carbon emissions. It's hard to abate sectors. So it also enables energy storage, and it couples very well with other industries and the transport sectors. Also, a very important detail for Brazil is that the already existing plans of the European Commission, European countries, states that 40 gigawatts would be imported from other countries. So it represents a large opportunity for Brazil, and Brazil can be a key player in this new market due to its energy sector characteristic and the existing ports and infrastructure. So it is a huge opportunity for Brazil to enter in this new commodity market. Okay, so it's a very important issue that we should be aware, and we have to develop our strategy to let's say, to face this challenge of being a very important country on this new commodity. Next slide, please. Some initiatives that were held in Brazil. Now the National Energy Plan, the PNE 2050, recognized the hydrogen as a disruptive technology. That's important, very important item that were developed by the government. The National Energy Policy Council, so the CNPE, have prioritized hydrogen as an R&D resource for the program regulated by the research and development program regulated by ANEEL, the Electricity Agency, and the Petroleum Agency. So hydrogen can get funding for research and development from these two important plans. And also the CNPE states some guidelines for the National Hydrogen Program. And last but not least, the Brazil co-leads the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy, having presented an energy pact for hydrogen that has three, let's say, foundations. There are research and development, innovation policy, the capacity of building and training, and a platform for consolidation and dissemination of information. And last, in July, let's say, it was stated the National Hydrogen Program guidelines based on 6, let's say, bases that are written on this slide. That's the technology base, the human resource capacity, the energetic planning, let's say, the environment and the regulatory basis, the competitive and market issues, and international cooperation. And all these, let's say, this base will be developed some public policies, technology, and market. So the idea is to develop these 3 mainly initiatives based on these 6 branches that were stated on the guidelines. The next slide, please. And what about the electrical sector the Brazilian electrical sector enabled characteristics? The Brazilian electrical sector has a huge renewable energy production potential. including hydro, solar, wind, and biomass. It also has one of the cleanest matrix of the world. 84% of our energy in 2020 were generated by renewable energy. There is a large transmission network. It's around 145,000 kilometers nowadays, and will increase to 184,000 by 2025. So it's a huge, let's say, network that we have available for generating electricity, renewable energy, and transmitting for generating hydrogen. Also, there is also in this phase of hydrogen, we have all mechanisms for developing research and development and innovation projects. There are two main programs that are regulated by the Electric Energy Agency and the Petroleum Agency. They are available for resources for developing research and development programs. So I think this, let's say, this framework that I tried to present, I think will enable the presentation of Barbara and IRENA in order to address these issues in a globally, let's say, scope. So the next slide, please. And now I will handle the coordination of the webinar to Piero Carlo dos Reis. He is now currently a research associate with Gesel. It has 2 years and a half. Piero worked as a research associate in the Foreign School of Regulations, a very notable school on regulation, dealing with energy, hydrogen, electrical vehicles, and other energy economics. He's graduated on mechanical engineer in Zurich, with internship with IRENA and DFL Energy Center. He has also designed to contribute as a lecturer to the non-profit training Africa Fellowship for Young Energy Leaders, coordinated by Renewable Energy Technology Training Institute in Nigeria, specialized in the field of energy policy and planning, renewable energy engineering, and optimization models. So, Piero, I will now, this floor is yours. Just recognizing that we have reached around 60 participation, so we are in a good shape. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mauricio, for this introduction. Well, I'm quite young, 27 years old, but I have traveled a lot. And among the travels I've done so far, one was in Bonn with IRENA, where I also had the pleasure of meeting Pablo and many other colleagues personally. Barbara joined in the meanwhile, so I only had the pleasure to meet her virtually, but still it's a nice pleasure. I would like to state the following, which I think is one key point Mauricio mentioned. I mean, we saw the debate on the role of green hydrogen in Brazil, and I think it's quite important nowadays in the climate change debate, not to isolate ourselves on the view of only one region in the world, Brazil, or be it European Union or China or so on, but rather to try to exchange ideas with experiences, experts, and so on from other parts of the world to try to understand and cooperate, since this is a global problem. It's not a regional problem. It clearly needs solutions through exchanging ideas, and also by what we are trying to do here, which is having 2 international experts from the International Renewable Energy Agency coming here and sharing their own insights into this topic. Having said that, I would like to introduce to the audience both speakers. So Mr. Pablo Ralón, if you would like to switch on the video, maybe so we can see also your face, and Barbara also. So Pablo, as I said, I met him personally in Bonn in IRENA when I was there as an intern. He is a program officer on renewable energy cost status and outlook. And he also holds a degree in chemical engineering and sustainable energy systems. When I met him in IRENA, he was working in the cost team of IRENA. He also played a significant role in shaping some important IRENA reports. For example, the one on renewable power generation costs, the one on battery storage costs, and as we will see today, also on the analysis of hydrogen costs. On the other hand, we also have Barbara, who is the program officer for green gas delivery and use. She has more than 35 years of experience in the gas industry, be it with natural gas, biomethane, or hydrogen. And she has also played different roles in different organizations. Nowadays in IRENA, her main role is to lead the group which deals with green gases, understanding which is the role that green gases can play towards decarbonization, and also some other policy-making aspects which she will be presenting soon to us. I would like to address two further points. One being the structure of this webinar, and second one, the language, to complement what Mauricio said. So the structure of this webinar will consist on two blocks. First block dedicated to Barbara's presentation on IRENA's activities regarding green hydrogen, and also understanding a bit what is the potential and prospects of green hydrogen. So this is the title of our webinar. And this first block will have her presentation lasting 20 to 25 minutes. And for the remaining 15 to 20 minutes, to get a 40 minutes block, we'll have a Q&A session with the audience. Then we feature the second block, where Pablo will be presenting his analysis into indicators of electrolyzer technologies and also insights into the cost of green hydrogen and how also the cost of renewable electricity are important in order to understand the cost of green hydrogen. So the structure will be more or less the same. And overall, this webinar should not last more than 1 hour and 45 minutes. We'll try to aim at 1 hour and a half, but we shall see soon. Last point, I want to mention the language one. As Mauricio said, the language in this webinar will be English. However, since the audience here is Portuguese speaking, we also would like to address their needs. So, for example, Barbara and Pablo have gently prepared conclusion slides, highlight slides, which they will show at the end of their presentations. So once they show this slide in English, I'll be helping translate it into Portuguese with my Portuguese with a heavy Italian accent. So I hope it's still understandable. And also at the same time, I mean, feel free to post questions in the chat box, be it in English or in Portuguese, and we'll do our best to translate it vice versa to make it as inclusive as possible and understandable as possible. So having said that, now it's 1:24. I leave the floor to Barbara. If you could please keep it within 20 to 25 minutes, that would be great.
Absolutely. Obrigado to Piero, Carlo, and Maurizio and Gesel for inviting IRENA to speak. Now, let me share my slides. Can you see my slides coming up?
Yes,
we are seeing it now.
We can see.
So
Okay.
I've clicked full screen. It's just taking its time. Okay, so you see the full screen, nothing else, yes?
Okay.
Is that right? Yes?
Okay, it's all right.
We see your notes as well.
Okay.
Switch view.
Yeah, we are seeing your notes, so it's better to put in, let's say, screen mode.
Change the display settings. Go to display settings.
Yeah, I did that. Let me display settings at the top.
And yes, maybe
Swap
that. Try
one or
that
the
one. Yeah, try that one.
Yeah. No, what did you
No.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Okay. So I see my notes on the second screen. Okay, great.
We can.
Can you still see the note? There's not many
Yes,
notes.
yeah, we can still
We
are
see.
seeing. I think you moved once for the full screen and then came back for the notes.
Let me disconnect the second screen just in total, and we'll just go with the normal one laptop.
Yeah.
I don't need the notes, actually, they're from before. So share content. Okay, and then you see the note, yes? What do you see now?
We still see the notes, but
Yeah,
to
that's
be honest,
interesting.
Yeah, if
I've
this
only got
I mean,
one.
I don't see it as an issue, to be honest. I mean,
Well, it's annoying. You don't see the detail, then it cuts down the size quite a bit. What about?
You probably did not share the full screen. That's a possibility.
So if I go to full screen and then.
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay.
how it
It's
works.
perfect now.
Okay, okay. So can you see my little window with me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Get rid of this. Okay, okay, I'm tiny down the bottom and you can see the, okay, I think that's probably as good as we'll get, yes?
We are in a good shape. I think we can move forward.
Okay, great. So thank you. Thank you for your opening words, Maurizio. I absolutely agree that green hydrogen is a disruptive commodity, a disruptive thing. However, it's not disruptive in its technology. The disruption is in the supply chain and the business models and the trade and the different dynamics between supply and demand. So it's very interesting. It's a disruptive technology, but not in the technical aspect. It's in the commercial and business aspects. I think also it's good to see that the CNPE is looking at national hydrogen production and consumption, because for us, that's the priority. You look after your own energy transition, then think about trade. That doesn't always happen in that order, but our priority is, what is the priority for hydrogen? Well, it's cleaning up your own country and helping solve the issues in your own country, and then looking for trade. And what it's also part of, how do you prioritize trade, the use of hydrogen? So it won't, okay. So what I'd like to talk, and I hope I'm talking slow enough, let me know if I speak too fast, but I'll give you an overview of what IRENA does in the area of hydrogen, and then what we see as the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. And then Pablo will talk about electrolysis cost reduction, but he'll talk after me, and I'll talk about an enabling measures roadmap that we produced, which really was a toolbox for policymakers on what is an essential framework or policy to create green hydrogen economy in your country. And they've been very well received, very popular. And then there's some conclusions which Piero will help translate, I hope. So for a start, IRENA has 156 members and 18 countries that are in the process of joining. So really, when we talk amongst our members, we talk amongst 184 countries, and it's in every continent around the world, in every region, and it's from small islands to the biggest countries on the planet. We really do two things. We do deep dive to gain knowledge on science and make analysis and make key findings and look for patterns and trends and findings. And with that scientific knowledge, we base our policy advice to our members. And basically, we say to our members, this is what you could do with your resources. Here's the technology, here's the benefit, here's what's happening elsewhere in the world. This is what you could do. Of course, it's up to you, but here's a scenario that could help you achieve your energy transition. And we do that through dialogue, mostly dialogue, meetings, workshops, and frameworks, which I'll mention in a minute. Everything we produce is on the internet. So more than one report a week comes out from our many people sitting in Abu Dhabi, New York, and Bonn. And for example, on green hydrogen, here's some of the examples. We really need to raise the awareness of the role of hydrogen. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There is a hype, but there is a lot of really essential information that is valuable. And our aim is to help our members understand, such as this talk, to help you understand what we think the role of hydrogen is in the energy transition. What we don't talk about today is the job, the social benefit, some of the other geopolitical issues. This is more a technical overview today, technical and cost. So in about 2018, IRENA also Maurizio, you said it's been about 7 years thinking about it in Brazil, or Gesel. In about 2018, IRENA really created the first report and having a deep dive on hydrogen, and you can see it was called Hydrogen from Renewable Power. And since then, we've had quite a few reports looking at different aspects of green hydrogen, from the cost, from the technical, from the trade, and its derivatives in biofuel, e-fuels, methanol, biojet fuels, ammonia, and then of course joining forces with our other units and issuing policy talks and policy guides, and all the key findings are on the internet. So you can see we've got a group of reports, and then we also have a very strong outreach campaign. In June 2020, our members actually said, can you please look at green hydrogen more as an agency? So we created the collaborative framework on green hydrogen, and that was also at the time our new Director General came in, and he wanted IRENA to liaise more closely and collaborate more with private industry. So it's one of 5 collaborative frameworks. And what we do on the collaborative framework is we collaborate between public and private to get the result. We don't just talk with ministers and our members. So we started that in June 2020. We've had 4 meetings and we've had 4 separate workshops. And from that, our deliverables are identification of working groups, focus areas where we need to do more work or where people don't understand what is the potential. And 2 of them will come out early next year, one on trade and one on the geopolitics of green hydrogen. And we also issued the Green Hydrogen Enabling Measures Roadmap, which I'll help you understand later, the slide later. So the collaborative framework is a place for Brazil to really listen under the IRENA meetings to what the other countries are saying, their key findings, and to be part of working groups and be part of the tasks like the roadmap. We had 1 face-to-face meeting. You can see the photo there. Obviously, that was before COVID. That was in September 2020. So it's the only photo I could show. Everything else has been virtual. But actually, we've had very good response to the virtual meetings, and we have 70 countries attend those meetings. So 70 of our members are really focused on green hydrogen. So why do we even look at hydrogen? Pablo will go through this a little bit more in terms of cost and reducing emissions. But for me, the hydrogen is, it's the extra. Can you see my cursor moving on the screen?
We see it static, not moving.
Static.
But...
So if I move it down, has it moved down?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are 6 components of the energy transition. Optimize renewables, that's great, but for end use, it only reduces carbon by 1/4. Be more efficient with energy, have more sector coupling, use less energy in the first place, have more efficient buildings and systems and appliances. That's great, but that only reduces carbon by 25%. Electrify everything that is reasonable to be electrified within cost and logistics. Great, but that's only 51% of end use can be electrified. And that only reduces carbon by 20%. So you have 30% where with these more easy to reach methods, the easy to achieve methods, you've still got 30% of your carbon. How do you get rid of that? And we call that the hard to decarbonize, the HTDS. And that's where hydrogen comes in, because hydrogen can replace fossil fuel as a gas, H2 as a gas, or a green ammonia and green methanol and biojet fuel. And we feel that in industry, hydrogen can reduce emissions by 12%. Transport at the 1/4, and that is really aviation and shipping, heavy trucking to a certain extent, larger ferries, but shipping and aviation. Buildings a little bit, because ultimately the aim is buildings can be electrified, but that's a grey area. So this is why hydrogen is important, and this is why in 2020 we started working on it. One of the key things is not doubling up, not wasting time, not wasting people's time. Our representatives, I think every week they must be invited to a meeting in IRENA because we do so much. We look at all renewables. Sorry, I didn't say at the part that we do this for geothermal, solar, wind, tide, wave, current, and solar. So, and bioenergy, the 6 different renewable sources. So we talk, and we talk to everyone, all the stakeholders, and in green hydrogen or clean hydrogen, there are 20 global initiatives, and they're listed here. And you can see that 2 of the initiatives are the dark purple. So we have the collaborative framework that I mentioned. We also have the Coalition for Action, which is more about actually coalition for financing renewables. And we have the green gas team, my team. We actually lead a work stream, or we're the focal point for IRENA in 10 of them, and they're the ones with black circles. So you can see that we're very busy. We're in the center of all the initiatives. We are either leading a work stream, for example, with the World Economic Forum. We lead the Accelerating Green Hydrogen Initiative, and that's where the roadmap came from. Or with IPHE, we're on their task force looking at methodology for certification. With the Green Hydrogen Compact process, we are the knowledge partner, which means when a new UN Energy Compact is submitted to the UN and it deals with green hydrogen, actually I get it in my email inbox, and we do a technical economic check. Is it feasible? Is it achievable? Is it trackable? And then we give our advice to the UN. So these are some of the examples of what we do. And as you can, I think over half of these have been created in the last year and a half. So it's a fast moving area, and actually it takes a lot of time and people to keep up, to attend meetings and share findings, and also get findings from these wonderful initiatives and share them with our members. So we do act as a very important player in the global dialogue and information sharing, and that's important for you, for Brazil. The previous chart, I thought it was worth letting you know that we have a yearly review. The last one was issued in June this year. It's called the World Energy Transition Outlook. And it's very interesting. We looked at where are we in 2018? And 2018, because that's the last full set of data that we can get on energy consumption and production. And if we look at the end use, so this is just end use, not primary energy, and where do we need to be to reach the 1.5 scenario? So this is not a wish list, and this is not a projection. This is the scenario of where do we need to be and how could we get there in the best possible way. So you can see at the moment we use, nearly 40% of our end energy comes from oil, a large over 10% coal, natural gas, even larger, 16%. Direct electricity, only 21%. And as I said before, one of the key measures to reduce carbon is to electrify as much as possible. So we recommend that we need to go from 21% to 50%, over half to be electrified. And you can see in the box on the left, there is no hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very niche market, very small amount at the moment is used in industrial process. And this is the disruption that Maurizio mentioned. We need to create a whole new industry, which is doable, but business needs to create it and governments need to support it and understand what its priority is. And we see the priority for hydrogen being in direct use and as feedstock for e-fuels, as per the previous charts, for industry, industrial processes and heavy transport and chemical processes. Interestingly, we still need a bit of gas, 3% for power. Because we need over 5,000 gigawatts of renewable electricity just for this 12% of hydrogen. So we also have to be realistic. There are some countries that will not shift from nuclear. They will not do it, and they cannot do it. For example, Scandinavian countries cannot afford to do it, and it might not happen by 2050. So this is also a bit of a realistic vision of decarbonisation. Nuclear is decarbonised. It's not favoured and it's not supported by IRENA, but it is decarbonised. So if this is all available on the website, and there's more charts if you want to use any of the data. So it's interesting if you hear someone saying, "Oh, electrification, that's the solution." It's half the solution. Hydrogen is 10% of the solution. Bioenergy, 10% of the carbon reduction. So it's a mix. And I think everyone knows it's not one silver bullet, it is a combination. Sorry, repeat slide. So what's really interesting is that we see, as I mentioned before, there's so many more global initiatives, and we actually see also from the government more concrete action in including hydrogen as one of the parts of the solution. And you can see here there are 19 national hydrogen strategies to date. Brazil is one of them. Well done. And there are over 30 UN energy compacts for green hydrogen. So maybe I could quickly explain the UN, for those that don't know about the compact. The UN set the SDGs at the previous COPs, and that was the Sustainable Development Goal. And we have a range of SDGs. SDG 7 is the aim for everyone to have access to modern, reliable, affordable and clean energy by 2030. But how does the UN track progress? Every year they issue a report, and the report says, for example, energy poverty has gone from, I think it was 1.2 billion people who didn't have access to electricity. I think that's about 100 million. It's 0.6 of a billion now, so they can track. But how do you track the SDGs properly? So the UN introduced what they call compact, and compact is an old-fashioned word for an agreement. And it's an agreement between a consortium and the UN. For example, the Green Hydrogen Catapult, which is a consortium of 8 global companies that say we will get investment, or FID, for 45 gigawatts of electrolysis for green hydrogen by 2026. So it's an agreement, and every year we will report on how progress is going. So the UN has done this for other SDGs, and in May they started this for the SDG 7, the clean, affordable, reliable energy. So the Danish Foreign Office said, okay, we're going to assist the UN with compacts for green hydrogen. So any UN compact that was submitted to the UN that included green hydrogen, the Danish Foreign Office, with IRENA and a few other partners listed below there, they put it into a brochure, a catalogue. So it's called Green Hydrogen Catalogue. And in there, we got over 30 major commitments from consortia around the world. It totals nearly 270 gigawatts of new renewable energy by 2030, nearly 130 gigawatts of purely electrolyzer capacity commitment, equivalent to 26 million tons per annum. So you can see that there's a huge commitment to green hydrogen from governments and from private industry. This again is public-private. Brazil did submit a green hydrogen compact. We got it, actually it came across our desk, I think last month, and they have very high ambitions, not with a number and not with gigawatts, but very sensibly. The first stage, which is we need to stimulate and trigger R&D, we need to invest in R&D, we need to get the knowledge we need, and we need to build the capacity. And the Brazilian government will report on its progress and investment every year. So that's interesting, it's a very sensible approach to not picking a number if you don't know if you can reach. So we were pleased to see that. So Brazil has a compact. So that's the hydrogen compact. And everyone was pleased with the amount of commitment. Also, projects around the world, hydrogen projects. Of course, there's a lot of blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is where you use fossil natural gas, and with steam reforming, with steam, you split the molecules and you get carbon dioxide gas, and you get hydrogen. Great, but the problem is you have to do something with the carbon dioxide, and you then need CCS or another end use for it, and it's expensive and it's unknown and it's untrusted, and it's not choice number one. You also have the methane emissions from the gas industry that supplies gas, which there's various figures. In the pathway to net zero, blue hydrogen is not acceptable. It's not the pathway. You will never reach net zero if you use large quantities of natural gas with the methane emissions and with the problems of CO2 capture and storage. Green hydrogen is the process of taking water and through electrolysis, putting the water atom into hydrogen and oxygen. You don't have any CO2 because you're not using a carbon fuel as the base. So the Hydrogen Council monitors hydrogen projects around the world, and you can see they're really clustered in America, Europe, Far East, Asia, and Australia, and of course South America. And there's 85% of the projects are in EU and Asia. Brazil, you don't have a dot there. You probably should have a dot for thinking about it with the potential trade with Germany, with Porsche, that big MOU. But it's interesting where we see they're clustered, and obviously that's where the consumption is needed, big time in Europe, but also where the trade potential is. At the moment, there's 136 projects that are purely committed to green hydrogen, over $300 billion US, and forecast electrolysis up to 500. Forecast electrolysis up to the size of 0.5 gigawatt, so it's increasing. But for cost effectiveness, we need gigawatt size. So it's just interesting to look at where the action is. So last year or earlier this year, we signed an MOU with World Economic Forum. Part of our, actually that was last year, part of our commitment to working more closely with private industry was to have strategic partnerships. And we have one with the World Economic Forum because the WEF have just got a fantastic network of CEOs and very high level, and a good network with ministers. So we sat together and thought, well, what do we need to do? Again, there's 20 initiatives out there. We don't want to double up. Where do we best use our resources? And we realized that there was no one place where you could go on the internet or in the literature where it was a hit list of, if I'm a country and I want to develop a green hydrogen economy nationally, also if I want to think about trading, what are the key policy measures? What are the key objectives? What are the key barriers? So we thought, okay, we need a roadmap or a toolbox, a one go-to place, a toolbox for policymakers to see the priority measures that are needed. So what we did was we sat down and looked at what are the barriers, and there are 6 main barriers. They are on the left. It's a bit small print, but it's ensuring it's demand, matching supply and demand. It's access, infrastructure, it's pace of development, again, matching, is the demand there? Maybe you don't need so much supply in the next 20 years, or depending on supply and demand. The technology, again, the technology is known for the components, but it's the supply chain, it's the market design, and the business, the way businesses are run, and that change from the old-fashioned fossil fuel global majors, and the cost, of course. It has to be cost competitive with other forms of energy and other forms of renewable energy. And then standards and certification. You cannot even sell a ship of hydrogen if the customer doesn't know what's in it, doesn't know what carbon footprint is, and doesn't know how it contributes towards that country's carbon reduction. So those were the main barriers. And then, of course, the objectives are to overcome those barriers to ensure clarity on the footprint, on carbon intensity, to have technical standards that are accepted for safety around the world, to drive a critical mass, to get demand for green hydrogen, not blue hydrogen, to prioritize green hydrogen, and to trigger investment to make it happen, to ensure an early ramp up of no regret infrastructure. We advocate that infrastructure for hydrogen is necessary, but the infrastructure and the development of blue hydrogen facilities, that might not be needed, and that will be a stranded asset soon. So we advise on that. We need to innovate more on business, but innovate on the way we create, deliver, and consume hydrogen and the changes, especially with the end users. We need to look at the efficiency and the durability of electrolyzers, and Pablo will take us through that. And we need to make it cheaper. So we came up with these 10 objectives, and each objective has 5 key ways to achieve that objective. So we end up with 50 key enabling measures, as we call it. And we've done this for Europe and Japan, and we launched it at COP. And there's a timeline. So we would strongly advise, we would love to work with Brazil to do such a roadmap on the way to create a green hydrogen economy and ultimately trade. So when we talk about the enabling measures roadmap, that's what it looks like. Very well received, and we will continue our work next year. We're also doing a deep dive on the on the projected expected trade of green hydrogen, and that'll come out very soon. But this is just a preliminary review of the results. Probably no surprise where the trade routes are, except South America features strongly. This survey. This was done through a survey with our members and leading private company organizations. So we expect that up to 30% of hydrogen will be traded. That means 70% is not traded, which means 70% is used nationally. And that, again, we promote that. And that's what I mentioned at the start. Half the trade will be by ship. Expectations are half the trade will be by ship, but as ammonia, not liquefied gas. It's easier to transport, and it has a range of uses. And the other half, pipeline, of course, the cross-border land-based. Some of the sea, maybe from Algeria and Tunisia to Italy and the other countries. And trade will be mostly regional, not as global, but as like LNG. LNG started regional, then it went global. So I realize I've got a few minutes left, Piero. I'll go a bit faster.
You could please wrap up, so we have time for the Q&A.
Yeah, what's very interesting is if you look at the countries around the world that have an established gas grid that can go from natural gas to 100% hydrogen, 2.5 billion kilometers of gas pipelines around the world. And you can see they're clustered in more colder countries and in the Northern Hemisphere that have gas assets. There's lots of work, for example, the hydrogen backbone in Europe, 40,000 kilometers that can take 100% hydrogen from wind, from import from North Africa, from bioenergy into hydrogen and use it for industry. Not surprising, the geopolitics survey is giving us findings that more people are planning on, more countries are talking about exporting than countries are talking about needing to import. 46% expect to be a net exporter, but only 17% expect to be a net importer. So there's a misbalance. And I think there's too much excitement about exporting and making money without looking at the priorities of hydrogen within their own national countries. What's really interesting is 35%, well, 54% of countries say they have a preference for green hydrogen, that's what meets their requirements. And 44% say, actually, it doesn't matter if it's green or blue, whatever is the best case scenario. So that's why it's very important to green hydrogen to be cost effective or cost competitive, and that will swing the balance over to green hydrogen. So there's a strong support for green hydrogen. So Piero, this is where you get your translation skills. Do you want to just go through it in Portuguese?
Yeah, okay.
Just
I'll
read it?
just do it
Yeah.
straight
I do
away, né?
understand it a bit.
Faster.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Ok, então são 7 pontos principais. Primeiro, que o papel do hidrogênio está ganhando sempre um maior reconhecimento no contexto da transição energética. Segundo, que as areias, vamos dizer, o terreno está mudando de forma bem rápida. Então, estamos também vendo sempre uma maior quantidade de intenções, de acordos finalizados a desenvolver e trocar hidrogênio verde. Que o IRENA está jogando um papel essencial de colaboradora nesse contexto de iniciativas globais. O IRENA também está conduzindo análises técnico-econômicas e de policies. O green hydrogen, o hidrogênio verde, pode também se tornar, vamos dizer assim, competitivo em termos de custos com outros vetores energéticos, possivelmente, dependendo dos policies, a gente vai ver. Sexto ponto, que esse roadmap que foi apenas apresentado pela Bárbara alguns minutos atrás é um instrumento efetivo que está sendo com medidas que podem ser comuns às regiões, mas também a gente ouviu que também está sendo especificamente feita para certas regiões críticas. E o IRENA também gostaria de colaborar mais com o Brasil para implementar uma estratégia do hidrogênio. So, having explained the 7 points, yeah.
Well
If
done,
I may,
correct.
yeah, good. If I may go to the Q&A, we don't have so much time, but I would go until 2:10, so that means 3 to 4 questions. I already received some questions from colleagues of mine in Gesel who would be interested in this, and I would like actually to link with what you just presented.
Yeah.
So I think one good point is the following. How do you see, or how does IRENA analysis see, the trade of hydrogen through pipelines? I mean, do you see hydrogen being traded in pure hydrogen pipelines? Or do you see hydrogen being blended with other gases, be those biomethane or NG and so on?
Very important question. Whoever asked that, a very good question. There's 2 schools of thought. One is do not blend. Japan will not blend. Japan government is not looking at blending, but they have an established hydrogen grid. Actually, they are way ahead with their hydrogen. Blending has 2 uses. One, it creates it tests the system. If you allow blending, and that means you increase the amount of hydrogen into natural gas. At the moment, the gas boilers around the world, on average, modern gas boilers can take 20% extra hydrogen with no changes at all. And there are projects in Europe that are doing that right now. In fact, today there's another cutting of the ribbon in a field of a project that's putting 20% hydrogen into a village in Germany, a town, and nothing changes. People just continue to live as normal with an extra 20%. Above that, you can, in buildings, you can have gas boilers right now that can take 30%. If you replace your gas heating, take 30%. However, because hydrogen has a third density of natural gas, the carbon saving of 20 or 30%, it is only about 8% carbon reduction. So it has a limited value. The value is in testing the system that you can introduce hydrogen, and if you change out the end appliance, then you can have 100% hydrogen. And it allows a network to go stage by stage by stage. But ultimately, it doesn't reduce carbon as much as replacing to 100% hydrogen. So some cities, some governments are saying we're not interested in blending. Other governments are. Your question was also, I think, from the slide I showed from the trade survey. Yeah, we expect half to be by ship, but not as a liquefied gas, because the liquefaction hydrogen has to be cooled to below minus 240 C, and the energy and the cost and the new infrastructure for that. If you don't need it, let's not design for that. And we can trap hydrogen in ammonia and oils and transport them as liquid form and then convert them either back to hydrogen and the other substance, or just use ammonia. Japan at the moment is testing a power station that uses ammonia as the fuel. So you don't even need to convert it back to hydrogen or another hydrocarbon fuel. So we expect to have to be by ship. And of course, cross-country, look at the map of Europe, 40,000 kilometers all over Europe, you can transport hydrogen, or certainly with gas swaps, hydrogen swaps, you can get hydrogen to the end users. The plan for Europe is it comes in pipeline from Algeria, Tunisia. It comes in from the east by pipeline from bioenergy, from the eastern countries, comes in from the north. Norway is just waiting for a contract to supply blue hydrogen to Europe. Denmark has one pipeline that it can one pipeline system it could convert, and they have, so Sweden and Denmark and Norway have excess wind. They don't need the energy. They can convert it to green hydrogen, send it by pipeline. In particular, to Denmark says it can supply 25% of all Germany's hydrogen needs through one pipeline, and tap into that European hydrogen. So I hope that answers your question. But of course, from Brazil to anywhere else, or Chile or Australia, it's by ship. So it also depends on the trade. Yeah.
Yeah, although there is, maybe just one point I would like to maybe just quickly remark is like, also we hear sometimes in the EU policy debate the notion of a no regret hydrogen infrastructure. So I mean, of course, when you have the view of gas for climate, that's a view where you have those 40,000 kilometers. If you have the view of Agora Energiewende, then it's a view of local hubs where you only have infrastructure locally. So, I mean, I would say that still is a sort of like gray zone. We'll see how as things go, what is the option policymakers opt for. Overall, I would also like to pose.
So if I could add to that, Piero, definitely hubs are seen as a more efficient way to go. And what does that mean? That actually means we would create new industry. So, for example, in Denmark, there's a green hydrogen hub being talked about. An industry, new industry, is saying, "Oh, okay, well, we'll go there." So you then attract industry. In the Middle East, we have the NEOM project in the United Arab Emirates, and they are saying, come, live in this city, work, base your headquarters in this city. It is totally zero carbon city, and they've now just allocated an area for steel factories. So they will produce the hydrogen or just renewable electricity, but also hydrogen as a fuel stock for steel, for example. And then what you're doing is you're creating new green commodities. So instead of shipping the hydrogen to the steel mill goes to where the renewable energy is. And that's the thing that we're really, IRENA is looking at, and we'll look at more next year. What is the potential, and what are the major manufacturers around the world, what are they looking for? They're looking to actually relocate. So as a country, for example, Namibia, instead of selling hydrogen, you sell green steel. You create the commodity at the location. And of course, that's more efficient. But of course, that's a huge disruption to business models. And with cement, which is one of the biggest emitters of industry, you cannot do that because the cement process itself issues a lot of carbon to the atmosphere. So the energy is only a part. So very interesting concept, hubs, but also whole new areas of industry.
Yeah. If I may, then just a second question by my colleagues, and then I will pass the question to Rafael Purgar and Luis Carvalho. I please ask anyone else. Okay, no. I'll please ask anyone who wants to pose questions properly to please avoid using the chat, and please use the Q&A function, which is below. That just makes a bit life easier since the chat is a bit flooded here, unfortunately. So actually, I would like to ask the point you mentioned, I mean, to Maurizio initially, which is hydrogen, the disruption is not as much technology-wise. It's very much in the supply chain and the business models. So, I mean, you are kind of a bit elaborated on this by showing also the kind of international flows of trade you have. So linking production in different regions with other regions, or even having production located in the same zone as demand. So that's an interesting point. What I think would be interesting also to look at is how much do these business models, which are starting to show up, how much do they depend on policy intervention, and how much are they relying on big gigawatt, well, hundreds of megawatts, if not gigawatt scale of electrolyzers or not?
Absolutely.
So
the policy intervention, I think, is number one, because a country has to prioritize okay, we can create hydrogen by whatever means, but what is the best use? What is the priority for the end use of that hydrogen? Are we just going to sell it, or are we going to use it to clean up our steel industry, or are we going to use it to clean up our shipping, or use it for do we have lots of chemicals? So it's really the policy will set the target. If it's not policy, market. The market will set the demand and the trends, and it's a mixture of both, to be honest. But we, as IRENA, we see the policy setting as the absolutely crucial. And when we assist a company to develop, either to draft a strategy that includes hydrogen, or a national hydrogen strategy, and implement it, we always talk about prioritization, and target setting is a very good way to create demand. Sorry, the second part of your question was?
more on the gigawatts. So like when we are seeing a scale up in size of electrolyzers, I mean, is that a relevant trend or not?
Yes, absolutely. I think Pablo, you'll talk about this, but to reduce the cost of electrolysis, there's 5 main ways, and one of them is you want to have bigger factories actually producing the electrolysis unit to reduce the unit cost for a start, and then to create hydrogen in plants that are gigawatt size, not megawatt. And that's why the slide from the Hydrogen Council, they track the size. We're now getting to 0.5 gigawatt. That serious plan, nothing's on the ground, but serious commitment. It needs to be gigawatt to be cost effective. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Then I would like to pose the last question by Rafael, and then maybe I would invite you maybe to take a quick look at the chat and answer any questions which were left unanswered.
I'll try and answer some. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Rafael, for example, this is the last one, then we can move to Pablo. Rafael says that hydrogen combustion produces water vapor, I mean, naturally, and which is, by the way, also a greenhouse gas indirectly. So what he's basically asking is saying that at the end of the day, you also have to consider that hydrogen is a decarbonizing factor, because it's taking away fossil fuels and gray hydrogen, but at the same time, it can also lead to an indirect greenhouse gas, water vapor. So how do you see that playing?
Well, I mean, everything we do creates emissions, absolutely everything. We just have to go for the best case and the least. And if you're focusing on carbon in particular, there's certain pathways, all emissions, everything we do, and even green hydrogen is not carbon free. You have to make the windmills, you have to maintain the windmills, you make the solar panels, you pay people to operate pipelines, you pay people to operate ships, people create emissions. So it's all to do with perspective. It's the best case pathway.
I would say at the end of the day, we need to look at it from a system perspective, as I mean, Rafael is kind of hinting, but we need to look at the numbers. So what matters and what does not matter. And I mean, here's the thing, maybe it does not matter as much as other greenhouse gas. I would pass.
Piero, let me just make a small remark, Barbara. I think you made an outstanding presentation, and you put a challenge for us. Is how to put Brazil on this map, in this global map that you presented, because I didn't see so much Brazil on that map. So we have the challenge of working together with IRENA, Gesel, and IRENA in order to put, let's say, some ideas in order to put Brazil on this global map. And in the next presentation, we'll have some let's say, points on the Brazilian map that will show that we have let's say, took advantage of your ideas here. So the challenge is in the table. So we have to move forward, working together, IRENA and Gesel and other entities from Brazil in order to make it happen. Okay. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay. Then please, Pablo, if you could start to prepare your presentation. As mentioned before, 20 to 25 minutes. In the meanwhile, I would please ask Barbara to check a bit the chat box. I see Teresa has wrote a small question and Luis Carvalho has wrote also some comments, which maybe, I don't know if you would like to reply. So Pablo, floor is yours.
Right. Let's see what you get.
We see, okay, we see full screen without notes, so that's good.
Without notes, that's awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, we always have these two screens things. So I don't know. So I'm gonna try and address something that has been very asked about. I work at IRENA at the Renewable Energy Cost and Status and Outlook team. So we keep track of all things renewable and end-use technologies and so-called enabling technologies in terms of what of their cost and performance is. And we do this at the global level, and of course we focus quite substantially on IRENA's member countries that have been explained by Barbara. And as you might imagine, it's not such an easy task, but with all things going on, do our best to keep track of what's going on. But of course, hydrogen has emerged as a very important technology, particularly electrolyzers, to keep track on. And we've almost, I think 2 or 3 years ago, we started ramping up our activities in keeping track of that, of those cost metrics. Maybe just to quickly summarize here, let me just get myself away. Barbara talked a little bit about that. This is what is shown here. Try my pointer, let's see if that works. Laser pointer I like. So is what is needed in terms of abatement or CO2 reduction to achieve a 1.5 scenario compared to the so-called plant energy scenario, which is following the government plans. So around 36.9% gigatons of CO2 per year need to happen. And a lot of that has to do with renewables. Over 90% of that is going to have to do with renewables. An important factor, which somehow was mentioned, but we need to emphasize on that, all the technologies that are needed to achieve this cost reduction are already there and need to be and can be deployed quickly and at a scale. So there's no need to. Of course, technology innovation will continue, but the main point is they are already available, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Hydrogen also, we talked about Barbara talked about hard to decarbonize sectors a little bit more in detail, but importantly, hydrogen can play a big role in balancing renewable energy supply, and also longer term, long-term seasonal storage is an important thing that hydrogen can contribute to. So I won't go too detail into this, just to highlight what has been said. The enabling policy framework is now, at this stage, is key. National green hydrogen strategies, we've talked a lot about that. Now, Barbara mentioned that 12% of the total final energy consumption in 2050 will come from hydrogen, and about 2/3 of that will come from hydrogen that will be green hydrogen. This means, in theory, we would need 5,000 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2050, which is a huge jump from what we have today. And therefore, scaling becomes quite an important aspect, right? The future will look very renewable. That's what we think. To get there, we need to think of renewable power tripling compared to today's level by 2050. And 90% of that will be from renewables to supply the electricity, right, in the world. Solar and wind will have a key role to play here. Oh, my laser stuck. Try to undo that. And solar and wind are going to have a key role to play. And for example, the solar installed capacity of PV would reach 14,000 gigawatts by 2050. But let's get to what people have been asking about. How do we get to competitive green hydrogen? basically 3 elements. Of course, it gets more complicated than that, but we need 3 elements. We need competitive electricity, we need competitive electrolyzers, and that will lead to competitive green hydrogen. If we take a look at the news, I don't know if you wake up today to the news. Some people have shifted to digital now, but back in the day, there was pretty much a lot of paper, and this was a lot in the headings and headlines. Renewable is too expensive. Renewables are not competitive, are not cost competitive. So it's very similar to what we sometimes are hearing now for green hydrogen, in fact. But if we look at what has been happening in the last decade for renewable electricity costs.
Obrigado.
Was that? Sorry.
Obrigado. Oi, Aris.
No, please continue.
Tudo com você.
Yeah, please.
Oh, sorry. A lot of this data that you will see now is from this report, Renewable Power Generation Costs in 2020. This report is something we update every year for power generation costs for all renewable energy technologies. In most parts of the world, renewables are the least cost source of new electricity. So we calculated that more than 60% of the utility scale, this is the large scale utility scale renewable electricity capacity that was added in 2020 was cheaper than the new coal option. Renewables are increasingly undercutting even operating costs of coal. And as we have seen, this has led to renewables increasing their contribution to the electricity systems worldwide. If we take a look at the cost reduction from 2019 to 2020, we keep track of this, like I said, every year. Still going on. Solar PV 7%. This is in terms of the levelized cost of electricity. So accounts for the, let's say, the full-time asset average cost of production. So 7% decline for PV, 16% for CSP, so concentrated solar power, offshore and onshore wind at 9% and 13% decline from 19 to 20. But looking at the decade, you see that it has been really remarkable cost decline in terms of the LCOE for PV, 85% for PV, so which is the highest among the technologies. CSP is still quite not there in terms of the market volume, still very few projects, but will play a role in the future for sure. What we do is we keep track to come up with these numbers, right? So we have a quite large database of renewable energy projects worldwide. You can see them here in blue. So the blue circles are one project that we have in our database. This is in 2020 US dollars per kilowatt hour. So kind of like similar to the LCOE units, right? And what we see here is what has happened in blue in the LCOE. And then as competitive procurement of renewables started, we started also tracking what the auction prices were. So we see in orange the auction database points. So each of these is one auction result, or sometimes the average result of the auction, whatever we can get of actual auction results or PPA agreements that have occurred. And then in this thick line shows the weighted average coming from 0.381 US dollars per kilowatt down to around 5 US dollar cents in 2020, 57. And what is happening, and this is just for PV, of course, and then what is happening here, why we include the auction databases, we clean them up and it gives us a good perspective of what is happening towards in the near future, right? Where the LCOE is probably going to get around these levels. As you see, there's some similarity around the head curve of the auction costs and what is going on at the actual real life project LCOE level. So just to have an example of PV here, onshore wind also increasingly competitive. What is shown in this fossil fuel cost range is this gray area is the fossil fuel cost generation range. And you can see that increasingly PV projects are undercutting that range as well for onshore wind. And offshore already within the fossil fuel cost range in 2020 and getting there in the future as well. So I wouldn't dwell too much. The 2022 average is around 0.04, so it's already quite cheap, what we expect over 2020. And in more and more projects going down to below 0.03 or below 3 cents. What has happened? Why has this occurred? PV cost metrics have declined. The cost of total installed cost, this is like kind of like the capex metric that we keep, has declined 81% in the decade. The capacity factor has increased to 16.1, down up from 13.8, and an 85%, as I mentioned, decline in levelized cost. Where has this come from? We know model costs have declined quite a bit, so they have contributed to. They have declined actually around 90% in the decade, and in terms of cost per watt. But in terms of their contribution, they've contributed half of the cost reduction from 2010 to 2020 in terms of the total install cost. There are some other items, of course, soft costs, balance of system costs are also important. Inverter costs have also come down, and this is what has enabled this change. The similar situation for onshore wind. So lots of decline in almost all major markets in total install costs, and actually all major markets total install costs have declined. This has been a little bit. Of course, there's country and site specific requirements, but capacity factors at the same time have improved with technology, even if the average wind conditions have declined slightly. You can see an increase in capacity factors. It's related to improved technology for turbines, larger systems, larger blades, higher hub heights, right? And this has led to a constant decline in the LCOE for different markets in onshore wind, Brazil being one of them. So around 41% decline in terms of the LCOE for the data we have. Globally, if we take a look at it globally, the LCOE of onshore wind. So here you can see the thick line is the global weighted average. This is very long-term chart that we have with data backing down as old as 1984. Same again in US dollars per kilowatt hour. You can see that the 2020 range is from 0.311 to 0.039. It has declined from 0.3 to 0.039 in 2020. So it's an 87% decline in that period, which is one of the longest data sets that we have. I can mention the costs in Brazil have declined constantly as well. If we look at very old costs, then we see a little slightly higher decline for onshore wind for 45%. For the total installed cost, are around 1,100 for PV. And in terms of the longer term trend, 63% decline and 85%, quite significant decline for electricity generation in Brazil in the decade. Will this be enough to produce hydrogen? We'll see. If we take a look at an example of Saudi Arabia, we can see that, I mean, we've seen some headlines of how you can actually get to very low electricity costs, and we can see how it would be possible to get to 1 cent electricity generation, which is already extremely competitive, of course, but this is the best case scenario with very good solar resource in Saudi. Costs are very competitive here, 550 per kilowatt, 8 kilowatts OEM, a WACC of 3%. Now, if you improve the OEM, you give it a little bit more lifetime, you improve the WACC, then you can get to these 1% cents, and of course a bit even more competitive total install cost of 450 gets you there So this is assuming bifacial single axis tracking with capacity factor of 28%. This just to show how it might be possible to get to below $2 per kilowatt electricity in some locations. Of course, may not be possible in all locations so soon, but this is already very near term for some locations. We need not only cheap electricity, but also competitive cheap electrolyzers. Barbara has mentioned a little bit around what is needed in terms of getting there. Of course, quite a few electrolyzer technologies are being mentioned and being active and are being researched on. Alkaline and proton exchange membrane are already quite mature technologies with technology readiness levels of 8 to 9. The scale is already higher than for these other two technologies, anion exchange membrane and solid oxide. Of course, solid oxide still has the promise of higher efficiency, and anion exchange membrane has the promise of very low costs, right, to mass manufacturing possibilities. But right now, alkaline and PEM are the more mature technologies that are already commercial. So we've tracked their costs from we've researched and surveyed the cost data for them and the performance data for them. There, with preliminary data shows a 60% reduction in alkaline electrolyzer costs from 2005 down to 2020, 67% for PEM. The efficiencies are harder to assess, but still we come up with a central value of 52 kilowatt hours per kilogram of hydrogen for alkaline electricity, and PEM around 54%. So of course, cost as performance are important for this equation. Here you can see a little bit of that data, preliminary data. This is not yet published, but will soon be. So we see for alkaline electrolyzers, a cost range already have fallen to between 350 to 1,660 per kilowatt. So the low cost value is already very competitive, but we'll see how that develops, and the central estimate is still to be defined, but it suggests a reduction of 61% from that time, and then 400 to are a little bit up the upper range for PEM, around 2,500 per kilowatt in 2020. Of course, there's not as much economies of scale yet for PEM compared to alkaline electrolyzers. Where the efficiency scaling, this important aspect of efficiency is not so easy to assess, like I said, but we have concluded of around 52 kilowatt hours, like I said. This is showing a little bit of the range at the system level, and then you can see here for alkaline electrolysis at the stack level, of course, lower. The difference is a little bit higher than in terms of PEM because of the complexity of the system. But PEM systems already as well very efficient, and we'll see how that gets. What does it mean for competitive hydrogen? So, of course, we have to a little bit check the numbers and see what happens in terms of the economics. This is an attempt of doing that. You can find more details in this report from IRENA, Green Hydrogen Cost Reduction. Talks very much in detail about how we get there, how we can get to competitive green hydrogen. In this case, what is shown here is the hydrogen cost, so the US dollars per kilogram of hydrogen. And in this orange, brown and yellow range is called the electricity price at 65. So it's kind of like very similar to what we have now. And electrolyzer costs on the upper range at 1,000 and the lower range at 650. So very in line with what is going on right now. This range results as electrolyzer costs come down to a range of 130 to 37, the levelized cost of hydrogen will decline to around between 3 and 3.5 almost US dollars per kilogram. And this, of course, the cost of electrolysis is assumed to be at 1 terawatt installed capacity, whereas the lower level is at 5 terawatts installed capacity. This will still get us there. So you see electrolyzer cost reduction alone, or even electricity price reduction alone will not get you there. So with fixing the electricity, reducing the electrolyzer cost will not get us to competitive hydrogen. But if, as expected, the electricity price continues to decline, and depending on the site, of course, assuming a $20 per megawatt hour electricity cost, again, starting with this range of 650 to 1,000 per kilowatts electrolyzer rate, is still not getting us there, but increasingly, as electrolyzers costs come down, which is expected to happen because they have a very similar, so far, at least they have a very similar learning rate to solar PV. So we might expect similar cost reduction for that technology. It already gets to very competitive levels that are on the low end of the fossil fuels range based production. So how we can get there, I won't get too detailed around that because we don't have enough time. I have, I think, 3 minutes left, but Maura mentions a little bit of that. It needs to be on manufacturing, needs to be scaled up. That's one of the key things. This will allow for more automated processes, particularly for PEM. It will unlock the ability to use roll-to-roll manufacturing for the catalyst-coated membrane. Larger players, as mentioned previously, are already getting to the 1 gigawatt per year manufacturing capacity. And this will unlock costs at the stack level of 60 to 70% reduction in costs. Apart from that, the modules need to be scaled up as well. It also will improve the manufacturing utilization, and then also beneficial to automation and faster, higher throughput. Learning by doing means, in this case, the lessons that you learn by actually executing the project. So developers will start to gain more and more experience and become more efficient, which has been the case, for example, for PV in the past. As developers have gained more and more experience, they have, and also standardization has improved. This has led to lower balance of plant costs, lower installation costs, and similar things are expected to happen with hydrogen electrolyzers. And then, of course, innovation is, there's a ton happening in R&D right now for electrolyzers. There's always aims to improve efficiency, increase durability, reduce cost by simplifying the design or improving the design. They all have their trade-offs, so of course you need to balance them carefully. So because if you pursue a certain research pathway, you may end up incurring an additional cost, so you need to balance them out very precisely and see what. So it's still a little bit of an open question where the research pathways are going to go. We're working on that as well as in the arena, and but we can see that the research pathways that are going to be pursued will certainly lead to cost reduction potential, the cost reductions, important cost reductions for the electrolyzer cost. If we take a standing, like a snapshot of what's going on today, we could take, let's say, a quite good electrolyzer cost of 770, efficiency at 65%, cost of electricity of $53 per megawatt hour, 3,200 full load hours, assuming, for example, wind, onshore wind, and weak, and the WACC at 10%, we reach around almost $5 per kilogram. But as cost reductions will start to occur and electrolyzers cost go down to 130, you can see that will unlock an 80% cost reduction in electrolyzer cost, will allow to really contribute significantly to the LCOEH cost reduction. And the WACC will change from 10 to 6, and then we'll see how that. So the majority of the cost reduction, of course, is related to electrolyzer costs and electricity cost reduction from 53 to 20. But is this too far away? Maybe one last point. Not necessarily. As you see from the example I put before, in Saudi Arabia already in 22, there will be very low PV and onshore wind, and this is going to start to happen in more and more places as the electricity costs continue to decline. So even if you would, here we set certain scenarios of whether the system is connected to the grid or not, and a certain sizing of the PV system or the wind system. The important thing here is as the electrolyzers costs fall, the more important thing will become to maximize the lowest cost electricity source. So you can achieve lower costs for hydrogen even at a lower load hours. So for the system, this is important because as hydrogen will shift to areas where the resources are not as good as here, of course, still green hydrogen will be competitive in those locations. So the good news, renewables keep and stay at least the cheapest option. So you will see that in the future as well for hydrogen, for sure. And some key messages for you, Piero.
Thank you. But Pablo, if you want to practice your Portuguese, now is also your chance.
No, thank you.
Move on, Pablo, move on.
Okay, I'll do it. So, os custos, então, eletricidade renovável a baixo custo vai ser, vamos dizer, o centro desse sistema energético, elétrico. E segundo ponto é que eletricidade renovável a baixo custo também vai ser um pré-requisito, uma necessidade para poder produzir hidrogênio verde competitivo, mas também não vai ser o único ingrediente necessário. No final das contas, também vai ser necessário reduzir o CAPEX, os custos dos eletrolisadores. Que nem também se foi mencionado antes, tem a expectativa de uma redução do CAPEX de 40% no curto prazo até 80% no longo prazo. E essa redução viria sobretudo de inovação, que levaria para para desenhos melhores de eletrolisadores e outras melhorias no aspecto da construção. Viria também fora de economies of scale agora. Vai ser um pouco difícil traduzir isso. E também
Economia de escala.
Obrigado. E também de um aprendizado, learning by doing, de um aprendizado enquanto que vai se tendo projetos e vai se tendo mais experiência e os custos vão reduzindo e essa experiência vai sendo compartilhada com outros atores. Último ponto final, que o governo também poderia ajudar a inovação em eletrolisadores através de sinais claros que vão até um longo prazo de tempo. Okay, so now that I have practiced my Portuguese instead of Pablo, I think we can jump on to the questions. I mean, as I did with Barbara, I would also have some questions which were posed by my colleagues, and I would invite all this audience to please post the questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, it's a bit too chaotic for me to follow. So the first question I have for Pablo is, how do you define the CAPEX in your report? So which are the ingredients you include in the CAPEX of an electrolyzer? Because it's a point I was seeing with some colleagues, like, do you include also, for example, engineering procurement costs? Do you also include construction? And how do you, more or less, do you have some more information on this, on these more components of the CAPEX or not?
Oh, I see. So we assume the system to be already installed. So that's the boundary condition there. The other aspects are a bit harder to track, of course. So that beyond that boundary conditions is a little bit harder to track. So we typically, for both renewables and electrolyzers and enabled technology, we assume systems already, let's say, on site. Let's say that. And full system, so full stack and system balance of system as well. including the compressors. There's a very detailed, I didn't show it, maybe I don't have it here, but there's a very detailed, in that report, there's a very detailed diagram of what is included within the system boundaries for the electrolyzer system facility.
Okay.
So with the diagram
Maybe
of the compressors and everything, what is in there, what is not. It's right. So I can link to it.
That would be great,
Yeah.
without any rush. Maybe a point linked to this one here is, I mean, I see many studies where the capex is normally forecasting to the future through learning curves. So we assume that there will be a certain reduction of so much % in the capex based on a doubling of the deployed capacity. Do you think this approach is a valid one or not? Where are the limits you have seen to this kind of approach? And what are you doing? I mean, I saw you already going into details, but when it comes to the modeling, to saying in the future what's going to happen, do you go beyond it or not?
So I think, generally speaking, in terms of the method, right, because we're at this stage where we've started already collecting real project cost data for electrolyzers, but as it was in the case with solar PV or wind, at early stages of the market where the scale has not yet arrived at the market, it's quite challenging to do so. But it will only improve with time. So we do both. We keep track of those actual real life project costs to start feeding into what you're calling the learning. For those who don't know it, the learning rate, typically the learning rate is defined as what is the cost reduction for every doubling of the cumulative deployed capacity of any technology. So, but like I mentioned, so far it seems, and that data available shows similar learning rates for electrolyzers than for PV, which are already quite high. And it's still a valid methodologically, let's say that it's still valid to assume that for forward-looking projections, but it needs to be balanced by constantly keeping track of actual project costs, like we do for renewables, right? So, so the more interesting stuff gets when you get costs, let's say, broken down by the cost items, subcomponents of the system, and then you can start seeing with time how those are changing, and what are the actual, let's say, drivers of cost reduction. But at this point, it's still valid to assume, let's say, certain learning rates, but we also assume something that is in line with our let's say, overall scenario analysis for the energy transition, right? So in terms of the actual deployed values that we showed a little bit at the beginning, so-called energy transition, say, that can get us to this 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, right? So you can so we try to be consistent with that, and then doing that, we come up. But in my opinion, it's a valid tool to use learning rates. They're used constantly, and you just need to be careful how you define the metric that you're tracking. And it's often not easy to populate it because, like I mentioned previously, boundary conditions may vary, right? In some data sets, so you need to harmonize before you assess the learning rate. But yeah.
Okay. I think within the context of this last answer, I mean, I would also pose the question that Ricardo Castello has written in the chat box, meaning when we speak about, I mean, of course, we are speaking of renewable electricity and then electrolyzers, but he would also be interested in learning more about the capex of the water infrastructure. So, I mean, electrolyzer depending also on water, which has to have certain chemical properties. I mean, if you have any data on the capex and O&M costs, which would come out with this infrastructure.
Yeah, of course, water is very important. We do I mean, the OPEX of electrolyzers is very, of course, still heavily influenced by the electricity costs. So the efforts are mostly focused currently on increasing efficiency, right? at the electricity per kilowatt hour. A kilowatt hour per kilogram of hydrogen. I seem to remember that you needed like, I think 8 or 9 kilograms of water. And of course, the water needs to go through, depending on the technology, actually, the water needs to be treated, as you pointed out. And this, what we're seeing, of course, even in the water treatment, there's a lot of R&D right now going on and a lot of efforts to, actually, let me just try to, can't see anything now. Anyway.
Pablo, if I can help, it's in the report if people want to look at the report, but the amount of water is not significant, and the additional capex, if you need to desalinate or clean up the water, was not significant. It was a very small part. Is that your understanding as well?
All right, now it's better. Yes, true.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't see anything. There we go.
It's also more or less what the IEA reports say. I remember they saying that when you account for the water capex costs, then it's $0.01 per kilogram of hydrogen, which
it's
more or
still
less
a valid
the
thing
range.
it's still a valid thing to consider, let's say, also for the future, especially also it's often the case for regions that are we have high water scarcity. So of course their desalination cost or something may be higher, of course, but generally speaking, it's not currently a big issue.
Okay. Then I would still have one last question. Then maybe I don't know if Maurizio would like to intervene. I haven't seen other questions in the chat. My last question is, I have also been working lately, helping Gesel by looking into the assumptions on the WACC in the weighted average cost of capital of electrolyzer projects and comparing them with those of renewable electricity and checking how the methodology, which methodology is following in order to get those WACC values for these two type of technologies. Now, when it comes to electrolyzers, do you have much data? Because I saw you just recently in a report on renewable energy power generation costs, you showed that now you're going to use an innovative methodology, which is much more, let's call it labor intensive, in order to get more solid results of WACC. So it means it's still work in progress, but for electrolyzers, how do you see it? Like, where do you get your current values, and where do you think it could be done better? Do you hear me? Pablo? Okay, no, it's just a bit slower.
Sorry, can you repeat? That went slow now.
No, the question I had mainly was, so I saw that you, for example, in your plot, you used a WACC for today of electrolyzer projects of 10%, then in the future 6%. Which methodology are you using?
Right.
And where could you
So
do better?
of course the WACC is it's quite a difficult question, how the WACC will be. It relates to the risk of the technology typically. So we have assumed here that of course as electrolyzer increases in deployment and the technology becomes even more mature and more widely spread, the perceived risk by an investor will also decline accordingly. And we see this similar to start already happening similarly to renewables, right? So we've actually in the last report, we updated our WACC assumptions. We downgraded, let's say like that, our WACC assumptions, because we started seeing that too high WACC assumptions were already kind of like not realistic, because as the technology increases in commercialization and scale, the perceived risk for the technology goes down. And therefore, that's how we reach out to this 6% for the future, but it may be even lower. And then let's see what happens. It's a little bit difficult to assess the future WACC, of course, but you need to assume that the risk of the technology will decline as the so-called technology readiness level will increase, right? Which is normal, and it has happened already for renewables. So we're constantly tracking. We're actually tracking the cost of finance for renewables as well, and it's already showing that it has declined.
Okay, if you have any future results on the financial instruments, for example, the role of equity, debt, or grant in shaping the walk, I mean, I would be interested in those because I think that's also somehow I still like a nascent industry. There's a lot of data gaps, but grants surely help lowering the walk to a certain degree. However, how many grants we'll need in the future, that's another point to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, the financing mechanisms are still open, right? And there's a lot of activity and interest, but it seems a bit delayed still as well. Like the big players in financing are still not there in terms of, you know, but some are, and some are starting to look at this much more seriously. But we'll see that, of course, as the big guys jump in, then also the WACC levels start to decline as well.
Okay, then thank you. Maurizio, would you have any remarks or questions?
No, I will thank you very much for your presentation, Pablo. We have an ongoing project that we mentioned to you during the preparation section that we held last Monday, I think, about we are developing a simulator platform. And one of the costs that we are having problems is related with storage and transportation. Did you consider storage and transportation on this database that you are developing for hydrogen?
Not at this stage. At this stage, we're gathering, we're doing our best to gather real life project cost data for just the electrolyzer system. But we leave it at after the compression stage. So we have not yet researched thoroughly on transporting that from there. But other teams at IRENA might, and I can ask around and get back to you on that.
Mm-hmm.
We will be very honored to present you this idea of the platforms if you
Sure.
if we could arrange this meeting. And one thing that I figure out that we in this chat we had a very strong activity. So we did suggest. I never saw that in any webinar that we host in Gesel. So it shows us that was very, I think, very important your presentation. And I think is let's say an outcome of this presentation that we should hold a workshop, not a webinar, so people will have the opportunity of let's say talking about, not discussing, but talking about the ideas and some peculiarities that Brazil has related to biomass, ethanol, and other feature. But I never saw an activity like that on the chat. So congratulations for your presentation. It really was completely different from what we experienced before, okay?
I think that's what disruptive means, Maurizio. People don't like it. People are resistant to change. They question it. Some love it, some hate it. That is disruption. And our job is to manage the distress, isn't it?
This is creative destruction of Schumpeter. I think Professor Nivaldi always talk about Schumpeter on our conversation. So we held a Schumpeter webinar here. So we must go forward with that, further with that, and to discuss it in a workshop that people will have the chance to present quickly their ideas. So I think. Congratulations. I never saw it, Barbara and Pablo. Never saw it.
Thank you. I think it would be great to do it also with maybe some other countries who are very advanced and have speakers from there and answer some of these questions as well. Yeah. Let's talk separately, Maurizio, and plan something exciting.
Okay. I would then like to thank Pablo and Barbara for having joined us and for the presentations. Thank all the audience for having been here. yeah, now the team of Gesel for helping to coordinate this meeting and for granting us the chance to do this, which I find is quite interesting, trying to link Brazil with ideas from outside Brazil. So yes, if there is no final point, I would like to wish you all a bom dia, and well, stay well.
Bom dia, muito obrigado.
Bom dia. Ciao.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Agradecer à audiência também pela presença e, em nome do Gesel, professor Nivaldi, também agradecer essa presença e a qualidade do webinar. Obrigado a todos. Hein?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Obrigado. Tchau.